Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. I hope you all had a happy new year, and I can't think of a better way to kick off 2019 than with 5 great bowl game matchups, including 4 ranked versus ranked matchups and 3 New Year's 6 bowl games. But we're going to start things off with number 18 Mississippi State taking on Iowa in the Outback Bowl in what should be a very strong defensive battle game between two of the top 10 defenses in the entire nation. Mississippi State has the #1 scoring defense in the entire nation, allowing just an average of 12 points per game. The most points they allowed in a single game this year was 28 points, and that was in a 28-7 loss to Kentucky early on in the year. They held Alabama to 24 points, and I believe over their last 2 games, they allowed just 9 points combined. So they are one of the best teams in the entire nation. They're number 3 in the entire nation when it comes to total defense. Iowa, on the other hand, is number 11 in scoring defense, allowing just 17.4 points per game, and number 7 in the nation when it comes to total defense. So this game right here is going to really be a test of who can really get across the 50 and really take advantage of the opportunities when they have them, whether that's converting off of turnovers or converting off a solid field position. We'll start over here with Mississippi State, who, for many teams, you hear about a triple threat and the 3-headed monsters when it comes to offense: your quarterback, your running back, and your wide receiver. Mississippi State has that, but it's on the defensive side of the ball. They had defensive tackle Jeffrey Simmons, defensive end Montez Sweat, and safety Jonathan Abram to make up a very solid defensive unit across the board along the defensive line, their linebacking core, and in their secondary. So I'm very excited to see how they go up against this Iowa offense that isn't bad, but was not one of the better offenses, in my opinion, in the Big Ten. Nick Fitzgerald, of course, we all know, the star quarterback for Mississippi State, entering his final game as a Bulldog, became the all-time leading rusher for a quarterback in SEC history. He was the leading rusher for Mississippi State this season with 1,018 yards. How will that translate, though, against an Iowa defense that allows just 102.8 rushing yards per game? So I think Mississippi State does own the edge at quarterback over Nathan Stanley or over Nate Stanley at Iowa, but how will he be able to go up against this Iowa defense? Will they be able to shut him down on the ground game? Will he have to win this game through the air? I think he's more than capable of doing that, but it's going to be a very tough test for him in this Bulldogs offense. Iowa, on the other hand, will be without their star tight end in Noah Fant, but does have T.J. Hawkinson and Nick Easley. But besides that, that's about all the receivers Nate Stanley has at quarterback. He does not have many wide receivers to spread the ball around to. So in Mississippi State, we know is going to hone in on Hawkinson and Easley, try to take away those 2 top wide receivers for Stanley in the Iowa offense. Stanley, though, many people consider him to be somewhat inconsistent, not playing always at his best. I think he's been fairly solid for the Hawkeyes this season, 2,600 yards on the year and 23 touchdowns. So I think this is going to be a very, very intriguing matchup going up against, like I said, the top scoring defense in the entire nation. But once again, something's going to give here. This could be the game where we're all expecting a defensive matchup, and you could see just an offensive explosion. Iowa is actually averaging more points per game than Mississippi State. The Hawkeyes have 31.5 points per game on average, while Mississippi State's averaging 29.1. So these guys have the capability to put up a lot of points, but going up against each other's defenses, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's going to come down to who has the stronger offense, who has a chance to force more turnovers, take advantage of the opportunities they have. I think that's going to be Mississippi State and Joe Moorhead, who will clinch a 9-win season in his first year in Starkville. Moving down to the Fiesta Bowl, our first New Year's 6 bowl game of the day, and one that I think is on everybody's radar, number 11 LSU and number 8 Central Florida. And as we all know, that this is the exact same storyline that we had last year. Central Florida running the table, going undefeated once again in a New Year's 6 bowl game for the 2nd straight year, going up against an SEC opponent for the 2nd straight year, and a lot of people, once again, are not giving them a chance. And we'll start with LSU before we jump into the UCF analysis. LSU, a very solid year, certainly proved me wrong. I know they got the transfer in Joe Burrow. I wasn't expecting a whole lot of production out of this squad, but they really proved me wrong. Their 3 losses coming to Alabama, understandable, even though that was a 29-0 blowout. Lost to Florida, who just won their New Year's 6 bowl game, the Peach Bowl, in dominating fashion over Michigan, and then to Texas A&M in one of the craziest college football games I've ever seen, going to 7 overtimes, one of the longest college football games, I think, in history. So all respectable losses for LSU. However, the FPI in this game is only giving LSU a 58% chance to win, and to me that seems rather low for the amount of people saying that LSU is just going to blow Central Florida out of the water. The Tigers are looking for their first 10-win season since 2013, so plenty of motivation there, but one thing that is going to hurt them is that their star cornerback, Greedy Williams, will be sitting out in this game, of course, in preparation for the NFL Draft, and we all know how I feel about that, my take on that, but we have to respect Greedy Williams' decision to do that, to stay healthy in preparation to potentially be a first-round draft pick. LSU is known for their defense, and many people credit them for being the DBU, defensive back university. But this year they have finally found themselves a little bit of an offense. We mentioned Joe Burrow, who has been consistent. He's been a steady quarterback. He hasn't put up mind-blowing stats. He hasn't been a Tua Tagovailoa or Kyler Murray or anything, but he's put up 2,500 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. So he takes care of the football, doesn't make many mistakes, and he's getting the job done at that position. But their running game is what I think will be the main difference in this Fiesta Bowl against Central Florida. Nick Brossette especially, 922 yards, 14 touchdowns on the year. That's going to be huge in this game. Going up against a Central Florida defense that isn't too bad, but allows 227.4 rushing yards per game. So that is a cause of concern for the Knights. And they've got to shut down this LSU running game. If they do and force Joe Burrow to win this game through the air, they might stand a better chance. Talking about Central Florida, though, they do have one of the better offenses in the entire nation, averaging 545.4 yards per game and putting up, I believe, over 45 points per game on average. So by far one of the better offenses in the entire nation. And I would be more inclined to pick Central Florida in this game if McKenzie Milton was still healthy. That is a huge loss for the Knights, and they've done phenomenal without him. They won that season finale against South Florida. They did win the American Athletic Conference Championship. Daryl Mack Jr. has done a phenomenal job coming in and taking over for McKenzie Milton. And the amount of support that McKenzie Milton has received from his teammates and the Central Florida fan base has been just amazing. If you go watch the American Athletic Conference Championship game, you'll see that amount of support they had. But Daryl Mack, in that championship game against Memphis, had 407 total yards, 6 touchdowns, including 3 rushing touchdowns. So LSU has to be prepared to take him down in terms of being a dual-threat quarterback, because he has the capability to run and throw. So this is going to be a very tough matchup in terms of containing Daryl Mack. Also on their offense, they have Greg McCray, who's rushed for over 1,100 yards, and Adrian Killins Jr., who's rushed for nearly 700 yards. So kind of a two-headed monster, double threat there for running backs for Central Florida. This is an offense that I think is going to give LSU's defense a bit of a challenge. But I think in the end, LSU will get the win. I think LSU is going to come in this game hungry. They're tired of hearing about it. We know what happened last year when Central Florida played an SEC team beating Auburn in that Peach Bowl. I think LSU doesn't make the same mistakes that Auburn did. I think they get a win over Central Florida and snap the Knights' 25-game winning streak. But this game will be close. LSU is not going to come in here and blow them out of the water. Josh Heupel is going to have his guys ready. This is going to be a very fun Fiesta Bowl on New Year's Day. Moving down to a very intriguing matchup in the Citrus Bowl, number 14 Kentucky and number 12 Penn State. Kentucky, one of the biggest surprise teams in the entire nation, and what Mark Stoops has done with his Wildcats program is just phenomenal. Had them in the hunt for the SEC East title all the way to the first weekend of November before they ultimately lost to Georgia. And that game, of course, being in Kentucky, so they had a home field advantage in that game. Their 3 losses to Georgia, to Texas A&M in overtime, and then a blowout loss to Tennessee. And that was obviously a killer for them, preventing them from clinching a 10-win season. But speaking of 10-win seasons, they're looking for just their 3rd 10-win season in program history. So this is going to be a major milestone if Kentucky can pull off the upset over the slightly favored Penn State Nittany Lions. The big storyline here for Kentucky, obviously Benny Snell, one of the better running backs in the entire nation. He's just 107 yards from being the #1 leading rusher in Kentucky history, and I do think he will clinch that here over the Nittany Lions. And as we all know, Benny Snell declaring for the NFL draft, but choosing to play in this bowl game. He's rushed for over 1,300 yards, and Penn State has been very generous against the run, allowing 168.4 rushing yards per game. So I think he will clinch that milestone here in this game. It might be, the factor for Kentucky. He's going to be the workhorse in this game, going up against this, decent Penn State defense, but nothing to be horribly afraid about. And I think that's going to be the mindset Penn State's got to take, is to hone in on Benny Snell and force Terry Wilson to win this game through the air. Can he do it? He's a solid dual threat quarterback, but can he win this game if they take away the run game? And I don't know if he's going to be able to do that if they take away the factor of Benny Snell. Moving over to Penn State. Another legend for them, Trace McSorley, the senior quarterback, playing in his final game for the Nittany Lions. And Penn State, a very disappointing year for them. A year many thought they could make the college football playoff, and they were in the hunt early on. Even when they lost to Ohio State, they weren't even out of the playoff race. But they should have won that game against Ohio State. Still one of the worst play calls that I've ever seen to this day. And I, of course, have no bias or allegiance to Penn State or Ohio State. As a fan, watching that game was by far one of the worst play calls I'd ever seen in my entire life. But losing to Ohio State, still in the hunt before losing at home to a mediocre at best Michigan State team, and that was really what was the beginning of the end for them. Then, of course, getting blown out to Michigan. So Penn State been a little inconsistent at times. Which team's going to show up here? They're number 12 for a reason. They still have one of the better offenses, I think, in the country, one of the better quarterbacks in the country, and Trace McSorley. Penn State, we mentioned Kentucky going for their third 10-win season in their history. Penn State is going for their third straight 10-win season. So if they clinch a win here, they will get their third straight 10-win season. They're averaging 34.6 points per game against a stingy Kentucky defense that allows just 16.3. So what's going to give here? Will Kentucky's defense keep it up, force Penn State to maybe win this game on the ground, or at least take away the mobility of Trace McSorley, or will Penn State's offense continue to roll? I do think that's going to be the case here. I think Penn State does win this game. It won't be in blowout fashion, but I do think they will cover the spread, which is about 6.5 as of right now. So Kentucky will go home with a 9-4 record, Penn State clinching their third straight 10-win season. And of course, James Franklin always has his teams ready to play in the postseason. Moving down to the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl, number 9 Washington taking on number 6 Ohio State. The big storyline here, we'll start with Ohio State. Urban Meyer's last game. This will be his final game as head coach at Ohio State. And many believe, or he says at least, his final game coaching ever. He's going to take the job as the assistant athletic director, and is even going to teach a class at Ohio State. So, but he said this stuff before, and he always somehow gets dragged back into coaching. So we're going to see what this happens. But this will be his last game as head coach for the Buckeyes. Ryan Day, who served as interim head coach during Urban Meyer's suspension earlier in the season, will become the new head coach of the Buckeyes. He did a phenomenal job with them those first couple games. I would expect nothing less going forward. I think that was a brilliant move from Ohio State to promote from within, to keep some of those recruits, to keep some of that coaching staff intact. So I do respect them for that, and I'd have a lot of respect for Ryan Day. The big star for Ohio State, as we all know, Dwayne Haskins, one of the best quarterbacks in Ohio State history. He's put up one of the best seasons, or if not the best season, by an Ohio State quarterback. 4,580 yards through the air, 47 touchdowns, and just 8 interceptions. He was a Heisman finalist, and this play by Haskins has led Ohio State to being one of the most dynamic offenses in the country, averaging 43.5 points per game. So this is the prime opportunity for Ohio State to close things out. Many believe they may have got snubbed a little bit from the playoff. They did win the Big Ten title game, but of course that loss to Purdue is what did them in, much like last year's loss to Iowa was what did them in and kept them from the playoffs. So Ohio State, tons of firepower on the offensive side of the ball. Washington, on the other hand, it's going to be the end of an era for them. Seniors Jake Browning and Myles Gaskin, this will be their final game in a Huskies uniform. And they've done so much for this program, so much for Chris Peterson, getting them to the playoffs just 2 years ago, clinching their second Pac-12 title in the past 3 years, so 2 conference championships in the past 3 years. And what a phenomenal job they've done. It might be a little bit of a rebuilding year going forward in terms of next year for Chris Peterson to build this team back up. Jake Browning has been a little inconsistent, though. This is not the same Jake Browning that we saw 2 years ago or even from last year. He's kind of been a little shaky. He even got benched once or twice this season in a couple of games. I believe that was in the California game. But the defense, more than anything, is what's going to anchor this Washington team, is what's going to give them a chance. Because you've got to have a defense if you want to have any chance of beating Ohio State. And Ben Burkherven leads the entire nation with 165 tackles, which is unbelievable for a single season. And their defense allows just 15.5 points per game and has allowed just 9 passing touchdowns. And keep in mind, Dwayne Haskins has thrown for 47 passing touchdowns compared to Washington allowing just 9. So something like that Kentucky-Penn State game, something's going to give here. Either Washington's defense is going to step up, much like they did in the Pac-12 championship game, holding Utah to just 3 points in a 10-3 victory, or Ohio State is going to continue to roll. I think Ohio State does win the Rose Bowl, and I'll even go one step further and say I don't think it will be close. I think Ohio State will take care of business and just blow Washington out of the water right out of the gate and get a huge win in the Rose Bowl to send Urban Meyer out the right way. Last game of the night on New Year's Day, the last bowl game before the national championship, number 15 Texas and number 5 Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. And we'll start with Texas. Both these two teams losing in their conference championship game. Texas, of course, to Oklahoma, and Georgia to Alabama, who, of course, both faced off Alabama, Oklahoma in the college football playoff. Before the Big 12 championship game, which Texas, I believe, lost by 12, they had 3 losses by a combined 9 points, which is unbelievable. Imagine how different Texas' season could have been. They lost to West Virginia by 1. They lost to Maryland by 5. I mean, that Maryland loss in the season opener was a killer. And Texas, nothing to take away from them. They're 15th for a reason, but that was a horrible way to kick off the season. And then they lost somewhere along to Oklahoma State by 4. So 9 total points. were the 3 losses for Texas. That's definitely very rough and hard to think about. But Texas is prepared to play in close games. They've had 9 games this season, including those 3 losses, decided by just 1 possession. And in those games, they're 6-3. Those 3 losses we just mentioned, but they have 6 wins in games decided by 1 possession. So they know what it takes to win these close games, and maybe they can get that here against a very, very talented Georgia team. Georgia will be without DeAndre Baker, the Jim Thorpe Award winner, so one of the best cornerback, no, the best cornerback in the entire nation. So Texas is going to have to take advantage of that and try to win this game through the air, through their passing attack, which is kind of what they've relied on, what we would expect from Tom Herman. They have 2 amazing wide receivers in Colin Johnson and little Jordan Humphrey. Tall, big wide receivers, great targets for Sam Ehlinger, who's thrown for over 3,000 yards and 25 touchdowns and does a great job taking care of the football, only throwing 5 interceptions on the year. Georgia's defense, though, once again, very strong, as you would expect under Kirby Smart, allowing just 18.5 points per game on average. And you have to wonder for Georgia, where will their mindset be? They blew the prime opportunity, a 14-point lead over Alabama in the SEC title game and slipped to number 5. And some people thought that Georgia should have stayed in the college football playoffs. They had 2 losses, one to LSU, one to Alabama, who they nearly beat. But I do believe the committee got it right, putting the top 4 teams in. Some people disagree with having Notre Dame in there. Some disagree with having Oklahoma, but I did think they get it right. Georgia, fortunately, left out, sitting at number 5. But you have to be concerned of where their mindset's going to be. Will their mind be in the right place? Will they be motivated to come in here and win this game? Texas certainly will be to clinch a 10-win season, but will Georgia be after missing out on the playoff by just that much? They have to rely on their run game, though. Jake Fromm, a phenomenal quarterback. I don't think he gets enough credit. 68.4% completion percentage, over 2,500 yards, 27 touchdowns, and like Ehlinger, just 5 interceptions. So he does a phenomenal job taking care of the football and is very accurate. But the run game is going to be the key for the Bulldogs in this one if they want to beat Texas. DeAndre Swift and Elijah Holyfield, obviously a double threat there, going to be very tough. They're averaging 251.6 rushing yards per game. Texas, very generous against the run, 135.9 rushing yards allowed per game. So I think Georgia relies on the run in this game against Texas. I do think the Bulldogs get the win. And to me, this game seems very similar, has a very familiar feel to it as the 2014 Peach Bowl when TCU just annihilated Ole Miss. I'm not going to go out and say that Georgia is going to annihilate Texas, but I could possibly see that happening where Georgia, like TCU back in 2014, was just barely left out of the playoff, came into a New Year's Six Bowl and just was angry and just annihilated Ole Miss in that game. Georgia may be in the same position here. Kirby Smart's going to have his team ready. They're going to go out there and show that, hey, we should have been in the college football playoff, and I think they're going to really try to put it on Texas here. Not saying that that's necessarily going to happen. I think Texas and Tom Herman will be prepared for a fight. I believe the spread right now, 12 points for Georgia, may be a little high, but it would not be surprised to see Georgia come out here and just annihilate the Longhorns, much like TCU did back in the 2014 Peach Bowl, angry after being left out of the college football playoff. So here is your final day of bowl games. New Year's Day, usually the best day of college football besides playoff Saturday. And these will be the final 5 games for the national championship. So make sure you stay tuned here at the Gridiron Expert for our national championship prediction and a couple other predictions along the way. We're not going to divulge that information yet. We need you guys to come here to our channel to check out some extra predictions along the way. As always, go check us out on Twitter for spread picks on all of these games. And as always, please continue to like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you next time on the Gridiron Expert.